I definitely know.
All right. Let's see. Let me check my audio and we'll
I
get
definitely know.
started. Sick. All right, guys. Today is the day that we've been waiting for. So, week 3, right? We're getting into, just like uh, we finally have a vehicle that's like, kind of in the right spot. Let me get my screen share up real quick. Oops, not that. Boom. Screen 1, go live. Dope. All right. So, let's rewind real quick just to kind of show you where I came from to, oops, no, don't open Blender, open the file. What are you doing? Let me grab it real quick. Give me 2 seconds. Boom. Live stream. September. My God. Boom. And then truck. Okay. Check it. So I have a thing here, right? I modeled. I was just kind of modeling this last week, right? Like as you saw in the video, and I mean it's okay. It's not the best thing I've ever seen, but it's not bad. And this is actually a pretty good representation of where I generally take things, right? Because especially for me, whenever I'm like working, I don't like spending all of my time trying to get the model 100% right, because for one, I'm not that good of a designer that way. Like I don't really like taking things 100% in 3D, because maybe it's my comfort in 3D that's stopping me, but like trying to get the right designs and then my process and stuff doesn't really quite work the same, right? I do rely on, I don't say randomness, but it's like, chosen randomness where I'm actively putting random somewhere, but I kind of know what it's gonna do. So, but when I'm modeling, you're having to make every single piece. That's why when I model, I just make a piece, I start bashing it around, and start, eventually you kind of start getting to a point to where things start making sense. But that takes a while, right? Like for an example of that, let me see, where's my demos? So we have, here you go. An example of that is this vehicle here, right? Oops. Because I spent, like, this is basically modeled and then I just added texture to it. Whether it's the best model or not, who knows. But at the end of the day, right, this model is pretty one for one as to what I was looking for, right? I spent the time, I made the thing, it's probably like the max of what I can do, which, for some isn't really that far. But at the end of the day, right, it's like the forms are actually defined and I actually spent time working on those like edges and stuff like that, right? For this one, I didn't really do that, right? Because if you remember during, I think it was this demo right here, I just kind of bashed some pieces around and I just stretched things and put things, and it was kind of like there's a randomness to it that I kind of achieved just to kind of get a semblance of what's happening, right? Just to kind of get a general understanding of like, this is kind of what's happening. And so for me, usually, I kind of stop there because for one, they never really need a model from me, right? It's like, especially for VizDev specifically, but most concept places, other than like, if you're doing something like super photoreal or in games where they actually take your model, generally speaking, a model is more of a nice to have, right? Like you'll hand this to a modeler and then they'll either remake it or fix this or whatever. But generally speaking, it's a nice to have. It's not really a necessity, right? So, that's context as to what the quality is about. It's really just like a bunch of pieces. Like this is the car. If I were to stretch this out, scale Z, right? You can kind of start seeing it. It's the car. You can see the headlights right there. But I just flattened it and I made like this roof shape or whatever. I just grabbed this bike off of like Sketchfab or whatever, just to kind of put something back there. I'll explain that in a second. But my initial plan, right, from this was I had my reference board. If you guys remember from earlier, let me grab that. Where are you? Boom. Reference board. Pow. Okay. So I had this thing, right? We had the truck, right, which is, oops. We had the truck, which is pretty easy to see. That's that's like, yeah, that's what we got. And then we had the camera, we had the lobster, right? And I wasn't having trouble figuring out something, but I was kind of like, just thinking about it and just kind of like as I went deeper into design, the other references started coming in as well, right? It's not that they weren't present to be in the beginning, but I was mostly concerned with getting the proportions right and getting the general kind of vibe right. And then I can like add on top of like, my general idea as I'm still exploring things, right? And so I had this camera here, right? There's certain functions associated with this. And then I have this lobster here, certain functions and features associated with that, right? And so the first idea was, you know how a camera has like film, like the older cameras, right? They have film, especially because I'm actually referencing an old camera versus like something new, right? So it has film in it. And I was thinking, oh, what if like instead of the bike being in the back, like what it is right now, I had like some sort of like thing that could kind of fit in the side here. So I'll grab it from here. Wow. Oops. Wait. Nope. This one. There you go. So if I select my objects, so right now I was thinking, oh, what if like these wheels, that was actually the bike wheels, and like somehow, these kind of panels would open up and the bike could come out or whatever. Very similar to like a film roll, right? Crazy. And so, the idea was it's just like a separate kind of vehicle that's part of the car, and it kind of, you can take it in and take it out, and it's still kind of out of the way. And it's nice because you kind of get that like trunk space back, right? You still get that bed, the flat bed. But the reason I didn't go for this one, right? And it is, in my opinion, a little bit cooler right now, just because you can kind of see it happening, right? But the platform that I'm presenting this in started kind of becoming an issue because I only have 2 more weeks left, this week and next week, to kind of do this project, right? On top of the fact that we're really looking for one image. And so I adjusted the format to make sense better, because I could be like, oh yeah, there's this bike, inside the wheel well of the car, and then they're going to be like, oh, so where is it? I'm like, oh, you don't really see it, but it's in there. I know it's in there. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of weak. It doesn't, like, if you were doing this, right, you would show like a breakout of the thing, show the different modes, have it pulled out, right? That would make a lot of sense, because the next thing I tried was like, well, I can't really see it here. And so I was like, well, what if I just pulled it out and just set it? Just said like, hey, this is the bike that I designed, and then it would go in there, right? And I mean, it's not that people wouldn't believe me, but it's just kind of like, yeah, sure, dude. I was like, I don't see how that works, but whatever. And, I can explain, like, if this was in a professional setting, I would explain this a bit further, where it's like, do the breakouts, do the function shots, do the animation even, just kind of show it happening. But in this case, because the presentation is a single image, a single flat image that people, they might not even see this stream when they see this image, right? Because, assuming this will be like a portfolio piece or something like that, or just on the internet somewhere, right? So I made the call to make it so, going back to the references that we had, I was looking, oh, okay, well, I did like this one the most, this truck with the bike in the back, because that's, I guess, more realistic, more kind of in line with what I actually want to do, right? The whole project is based off of the idea of, oh, I really want to do this. I want to just buy a truck, get a bike, or I already have a bike, but, attach the bike in the back and go road tripping around and exploring, right? And that was the heart and soul of this project. That's why I'm actually doing this truck. So I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, So I kind of went back to that one. And what I liked is when you actually go to the camera view, right, you get a nice silhouette there. And I had this dome kind of thing here. I was thinking it's going to be some sort of like covered top, but I was like, you'll see in a second, but I actually got rid of it. But I like that silhouette that it creates. It's an interesting kind of dynamic happening there. And that's ultimately what I ended up going for, right? So a couple different reasons as to why things exist. So I didn't go with that more, I guess, inserting bike, right? Just because I was like, nah, you can't really see it here. And I don't really want to kind of break this into like a 5-page portfolio piece. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thinking. And I want everyone to pay attention to that, right? Because there's times where there's things that you need to do, right? There's things that you want to show, but then the format that you're presenting in is limited, right? So for example, this is a very similar limitation to the way like games and film kind of happens, right? If you're ever playing a game or watching a film, there's certain ways that we interact with the props, with the things, right? So what happens is, if the function slash the cool part about the vehicle or the prop or whatever it is isn't able to show off the design that you have, you need to rethink that design. Because even though it could do it, and we all know it can do it, but in the animation or in the game sequence or whatever it is, right, it doesn't show it. It's kind of a wasted effort, because it's like, well, you have this idea, but no one sees it, you know? And so you have to kind of dial it back sometimes. And this is, you know, this is just something that just happened randomly as I was working. But it's a very real occurrence, right? Don't be stuck to your ideas just because you had them. Remember, right? This is something that, you know, you want to understand about our industry is there's a format in which things are presented. So just make sure that you're kind of working towards that, right? So that's the view that I rendered out. That's what I had. Quick tip, I don't know, it's not that pro of a tip, but when you're rendering and you know you're going to go to a 2D format when you have to paint something, just make some cubes in your scene, and it helps you with perspective. So right now you can't really tell, but the the camera is like slightly Dutch, it's slightly rotated, and it's kind of hard to make a grid off of a rotated thing. But just a quick render of some cubes that are kind of like off, like you see the silhouette of my car. It's nothing's obstructing it, right? If you just render it that way, it kind of helps. So not a huge deal, but I imagine some people didn't know that, especially because if you're doing a vehicle, right, generally speaking, the edges aren't like perfectly horizontal, right? Just because vehicles have like, you know, wider areas, thinner areas, you know, there's like slopes and stuff. So nothing really follows a 90-degree angle. And so it can be kind of hard to line up this grid once you have this in there, because like the windshield isn't vertical. The body is kind of like, it kind of like widens up and then thins out again. And even the whole thing is kind of like sloping in some areas. So there's really no 90 degrees on here that you could really use. So, you know, things to keep in mind. So rendered out, right? Did my thing, right? And then this is what we have, right? Ultimately coming up with the flat render that we have. And this is where I just started painting, because like I said before, I have this model and I'm like, well, I didn't really spend that much time on it. You know, I spent the 2 hours, right? I mean, more likely 1 hour during last week's stream, right? And then there was like a small little hangout afterwards for a while, and I was just kind of like, I just continued modeling just to kind of get me somewhere. It was like another hour or two. It wasn't crazy, but what I would do, or what I did, was there's some panels, there's some things that I'm like, I really don't like that, right? So what I usually do from this point on is just render this, right? Start painting things down. I was like, oh, I don't really like that seam line right there, right? I just got rid of that. I just started kind of merging some things. There's some like weird kind of things happening in there. Do whatever you need to do to kind of make that, you know, look good, because now you're actually designing things. Like there's a cube right here. There's this weird cut. Start like kind of fixing these things, and you can make some pretty extreme changes, right? So I spent, I don't know, maybe like another 2 hours-ish just throughout the week, right? Painting this down and kind of getting this to a gray model, but in the design that I'm kind of looking for. There's some things I still want to do to it that I'm going to show you today, but most of it is pretty far along, right? So from the original, right, I'm going to show the original. From this model here to this design here, right? Some pretty heavy changes towards that side panel, right? And so there are some things that I was doing, like I didn't really like how straight up that windshield was, right? If we look at this angle, oops, this angle here, and then I didn't like how it kind of like breaks up the side panel, so I kind of made that like more straight, because once you look at the original, the gesture kind of like moves us down, and then there's like these gaps and all these things. I didn't really like that too much, but when I was just kind of bashing things around, it was just, you know, there was a lot of like just chaos happening. But I just needed something to give me an idea, right? Because I can fix it once we get it, but I need to get it first, right? And so made the adjustments, did the thing. That's the bike, because what happened was I was designing this without the bike in mind. And I got to literally about this point, and I was like, I got rid of that initial bike idea, right? And then I was like, I had to look back at my reference and be like, Oh wow. Oh yeah, I'm missing something. I'm missing like a couple different ideas, right? And so the first idea being, well, there's a whole other vehicle on this vehicle somehow, right? The bike idea. I was like, well, I really liked that original thing, so I kind of brought it back, right? So I brought back the bike idea. I kind of painted it up a little bit, right? There's some things, it's not like a straight up bike. There's sci-fi-ness to it, there's design. I did things to it, right? And so it's kind of there. It's loosely indicated right now, but it's like, kind of there. And then the next thing was, because I got rid of that bike the first time, right? The one that inserts into the side of the vehicle, the idea behind that was, oh, I made it because it's like the camera idea with the film, right? I talked about that a second ago. Well, now that I got rid of that whole function, the whole camera reference is gone now, right? And that's something that happens a lot. I talked about this yesterday during the private stream feedback. But for everybody, as you're designing, look back at your references, right? We're like 3 steps into the project at this point, 3 steps out of 4, right? We're pretty far. 2.5, 3 steps is like the end of this stream, but we're pretty far along, mostly halfway through. And you want to double check, because as you make decisions, right, you're kind of looking at your reference board and you kind of do some things and you're like, all right, cool. And then the ideas start developing, you start running with it. But that running with it can kind of end up pushing your project in a really weird way sometimes. And it might look cool, but it might not work with the reference that you're actually referencing, right? And so because I got rid of a function, because of the format that I was presenting, I lost one of the references that I initially had. So when I was designing the side panel, I thought of a different way to use that reference. So looking at, let's bring this in, Nikon FM grip. So for those that don't know, there is such thing called it's like a grip for your camera, right? Let me see. What is it? Winder. There you go. So, wait, let me find the exact camera. It exists, I promise. All right, there you go. Sickness. So, old cameras in general, right? There's a winder attachment for the bottom of the camera, right? If I take this copy image, pop. And one of the cooler parts about like just cameras as a whole, right, is like this is the body of the camera, right? And that's what you're normally using. But then you can buy this like grip here. Modern day cameras just more for like batteries and performance boosting things. And sometimes some other things. Back in the day, this was a winder, so it would auto wind your camera for you. And so it was a cool attachment. It's not necessary, but it's kind of cool, right? There's a base thing, and then there's the attachment. And I was like, oh, what if I use that idea? And so when I started designing these side panels, I created a bigger separation between the kind of base truck here, right? And then this kind of bottom platform. I was like, oh, what if you could just like kind of mix and match these pieces, right? And that's going to be one of the more prominent features. So taking my reference and using it a different way, because I'm just kind of adapting with the idea as it grows and thinking it through, right? Don't get stuck with the ideas that you have, because when you introduce some of these ideas, that was your choice. And oftentimes it doesn't really matter how you use the idea. It's just the fact that you're using it. So biggest thing, right? Double check, go back and see like, hey, is my reference actually being used the way I was intending on using it? Or has it kind of like gone askew and I'm kind of going off track? Because that happens a lot. When you go to review with your art director or whoever, right? You want to make sure that your idea is still, present. It still like functions with the ideas that we kind of had. And so I just kind of wanted to walk you through that, because this week it's just been me kind of like tumbling through this, just trying to figure it out, right? Because this happens at work basically every day. It's how do we solve some problems, right? The the initial problem was, I'm only going to present this as a flat image. And you really can't just say, oh, believe me, man, this does this, right? You have to actually figure it out. And so as I was kind of like painting this down and going through this, I was just working through ideas and figuring things out. And ultimately, I'm kind of where I'm at right now. It's not completely done yet. It's not even, I mean, it's not even close to being where I kind of want the body to be, but it's at a good spot to start, talking about the next things, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Pretty long-winded, right? But the idea is, just pay attention, right? Keep your eyes up. Make sure that you're actually looking at your design. There's a tendency for us to kind of go on autopilot sometimes. You know what I mean? So, cool. Let's see. Boom. Let's go. So, next things, right? For those that aren't part of the Livestream Plus, I told everybody that the next steps, right, is kind of taking our designs and starting to kind of, add details, materials, and stuff like that. And so, for context on all this, right, this is what I kind of use to kind of be able to design things at a high quality while also maintaining some of the freedoms of not having to worry about like a bunch of different things, right? So basically, this idea that I'm about to do right now stems from simplifying, right? How many of you kind of have trouble with like designing, painting, and then thinking about like material design, graphic read, and all that stuff, right? Because when you're doing a vehicle like this, there is value groupings. There's, just like an environment painter, just like anything, even for characters, right? There's value groupings, there's materials, there's all sorts of stuff that you need to worry about. And for me, that can get kind of overwhelming, right? And I imagine a lot of you are like that as well, right? When you start painting, try to break things down as much as you can, right? Try to simplify things. This is why when we do sketches and things, right? I'll just do it in line. Don't worry about paint yet, right? We don't want to worry about values. We want to worry about the forms. And then you add values, and then you add color, and then you start rendering. And that's, the reason we break that down is because you're doing bite-sized pieces versus like, hey, give me something photoreal right off the bat, right? There's too many things to kind of balance. And so with a vehicle, it can be kind of hard because you're thinking about, what color is this vehicle? What is it doing? And then you're like, you're trying to design the side panels, and then you're trying to design the cut lines and all these things. And when you're doing all that at once, it can go kind of awry, especially when you're painting panels that need to kind of flow through the thing. But let's say like, don't create a server. Command Shift New, Command Shift N in Discord is create new server, just so you know. But, there you go. So, whenever you're creating, like, let's say like a panel like this, right? This is one panel, this is another, and this is like a red, or this is like a black color, right? It's really hard to kind of continue that motion whenever your values are two different values, right? If I did like a black paint job on the back and red paint job on the front, which is what I'm going to do, surprise. But it's going to kind of look weird because your values don't continue on. So what I like to do is paint everything as one material, right? Just paint it as if it's a gray box, as if you're kind of like, doing this in like Blender or something. You're assigning material. You'll assign materials later, right? It's the same exact idea, right? Just paint it as if it's all just kind of gray. It's like a matte kind of box. In this case, I'm kind of getting a little bit more shine on some pieces. That way we get like some highlights and various things like that. And as I continue to paint, I'll show you how I take this from basically a base flat gray, or I guess a shiny-ish gray, into the full colored version, while trying to maintain that kind of like mindset of simplicity, right? So we'll get there in a second, but that's what I've been doing, right? We're all caught up now. So the next thing I want to show, when you're designing, creating form languages is pretty hard. So, here it is. Boom, that, week 1. The good news is we have forms, right? So, this is one of the things that I like to do. When you have your thumbnails, right? And there's some cool things happening here, right? There's generally speaking, it's working out pretty well. There's some things you like, there's things you don't like. And what I like to do is take advantage of that, because I already painted these, you know, and they're not perfect, but there's a good amount of detail in them. And then there's you know, it's kind of value painted. So I do kind of have some planes in there, like surfaces, right? And so when I'm designing, especially in the later phases, these these first thumbnails don't go to waste, right? What I want to show you is just how I use some of these things. So I'm going to take literally one of these, right? And I'm going to bring it into this painting because you have some cool form languages already. Some of these things are actually working out pretty nicely, especially like some of this stuff here where I have, boom, some like this. I already painted it once. I don't need to do it again, but I need some details, right? I need something that kind of shows that, you know, there's just more, you know, nuance to it, right? Cut lines, panels, various things like that. And what I like to do is use these pieces to then help me kind of get in a better zone in my current painting, because I need the detail of the other one without having to repaint things, and I need to apply it to here, right? So what you can do is you take that piece, right? Set it on darker color, or since we're in grayscale, you can probably leave it alone. But I'm gonna set it in dark color for now, just to see how that goes. Clip it in, drag it around, and like transform it, right? Just use the transform tool and start putting it in places where you kind of need, like this might be like a good rim, for example, right? Or a wheel. For those that don't know, it's called a wheel. It's not a rim. Rims don't do that. And so, you know, using assets that we already made, right? We're trying to just be a little more resourceful with what we have. I can use these pieces, distort them around, and automatically you're like, oh wow, I have free detail at this point, right? It's automatically done for you. And so, you know, just using pieces like this, you kind of get it in the realm of what you need. And then what I'll start doing is I'll use my smudge tool, right? So if you have the finger tool right here, the smudge tool, it's usually on blur, but just click and hold blur, and then you just go to smudge, and it's just a hard round like flat. So if I go to my brush settings here, it's just like a hard round that's been like pinched, and then the strength's at 99. I can kind of drag these cut lines around, right? Some of these things, like this thing, I don't really need that, right? Like that's not something I want, so get rid of that. But then like, oh, I like that cut line, I'm gonna extend that up, you know, and then I'm going to kind of get rid of that, just kind of move it that way so it's like some sort of like divot or something. I can kind of continue a lot of these things, and this is how I'll start kind of adding detail where I want it, start increasing the amount of information that we have, because we have our base form, right? And this works with the base model too, right? I could do it with this. I would kind of like just use some of those old panels, start painting, and I'm kind of reusing my assets because, you know, like we had in like previous weeks, right, where I'll be like, oh, I have this tree from this other painting I did. It's the same thing, but the perfect part is these are already forms that you're kind of okay with, right? You already designed it for this vehicle, you already used it, so you might as well take it and bring it into your next design. And this is why I work this way rather than just doing line work, right? For those of you that like design or like, you know, done things like this, right? Usually it's like I'll do a black silhouette, and then you'll just kind of like draw inside to kind of, you know, get the design that you want. And yeah, that is effective, right? It's not that it's bad or anything, you know, it's just up to how you work. But whenever I work, I know that I need some details. I need photos and stuff at the end, right? Because I just need cut lines. I need forms that kind of resemble a certain thing or whatever. Basically, it's I don't want to render so much. And so instead of wasting this kind of stage, I'm going to use it towards the end. But if I only do like a black silhouette, or if I only do like loose sketches, you can't really use it that way. And so it does two things. The first stage being really defining what that form language looks like. And then two, you're creating your asset sheet to use for the later painting, right? And the cool thing is you can use this forever, right? These are your paintings. You can do whatever you want with them, right? And for example, I had a class in 2016. Actually, I looked it up earlier, right? And I did these thumbnails where we're just trying to find pieces. I did the exact same thing. I just made a silhouette, started making shapes. And then I was like, These are pretty cool. Yeah, you know, I kind of like where it's going. Like some of the form stuff don't quite make sense, but that's not really the point of this. It's mostly like trying to figure out what the shapes and the things, and I can kind of rearrange it later. And so using these pieces, right? I kind of started making my paintings for that project. But I've been using these pieces ever since. I've used it for work projects. I've used it for personal projects. I used it last month for like some of the ship stuff, and then the what I like to do is this, right? I'll like if I need like let's specifically cut lines or something, just like small detail lines. What I'll do is if you get this all on a white page, and I'll just Command Alt Shift E, right, to where I have a flat layer with all the vehicles on it essentially, right? If you go to you can do this two ways. If you go to Filter, Stylize, Find Edges, right, it gives you line work of the thing thing you're looking at. So I have some cool line where you can levels this out to like, you know, give you more or less detail if you want, right, depending on how you want it. But for that asset sheet that we did earlier, oh, sorry. I already did that, right? I did that for these drawings, you know, back in the day, right? And I've been using it ever since. You've seen me kind of bust this out a couple times. And so now I have these cool sci-fi cut lines that are complex and unique, and now I can use that to help facilitate the rest of this truck, right? This is kind of why I work the way that I do. I'm setting myself up later because I know I'm going to need certain things, so you might as well just do it, you know, just take some time. And the cool part is when they see like higher fidelity thumbnails, they're like, wow, that's really cool. And then, you know, it still helps you as you go through, right? I try not to waste too much effort as I'm doing things, right? There's a process for kind of everything. So for those of you following along, just think about that. You don't have to do it this exact way, but think about your process. Think about things that would have been nice to have. You're like, oh, I wish I had, you know, some of these textures. Because you could just take these cut lines and apply it in 3D as a texture, right? And then you have like, you know, cut lines that are in perfect, you know, perspective with whatever platform that it's on, right? And so I didn't take the model that far, but I could have, right? And that's the freedom and that's the understanding of this process and what I'm doing here. So hopefully that makes sense. Long explanation, but you know, I kind of want to get everyone up to speed as to what I'm about to start doing right now. This way we're just kind of like running, right? We'll talk about the material stuff in a bit. Let me kind of make some adjustments based off of some design things. I kind of left this like top roof part, you know, a certain like kind of blocky still because I wanted to really address that part today, right now. And then we'll get into the paint and stuff like that. So cool. All right. So if there's any questions, now's the time. I'm kind of getting into this, into like the more rendery mode to kind of start, you know, just figuring this out. So ask away if you guys have anything you need to say. I didn't mean for that to rhyme. Boom, pop. I use the pen tool a lot. Pen tool and airbrush. And this is something that like for everybody, like when you're like starting off and you're like learning how to paint and stuff, this is why we want to learn how to paint, right? This is why we want to just get good at painting primitives, because the better you get at like just understanding how to make forms like actually, you know, like turn and actually look okay, it helps you with stuff like this. Because you know, there's people out there that they're, you know, they might model really well, but they can't really paint that well, right? They're kind of missing some of those more fundamental skills. And so when they model, they're forced to like actually finish the model, right? Because if they try and paint it, it's not going to work out okay. But this for me is really about freedom, right? I can choose like this, and for everybody watching, like this is why I ask you, like, hey, what do you want to see, right? Do you want to see me actually like paint this? Do you want to see me model it, right? And the reason it's so easy to ask anybody what they want is because, you know, I have the fundamentals to kind of back it up, right? There's the ability to just decide like, okay, cool, I'll just paint it. You know, it provides you so much freedom. You can make decisions. You can, you know, everything kind of becomes a little bit easier, and just learning. Just take the time, figure out these things, learn how to render things, and oh my god, it does everything for you. And just being able to paint as good as a model, right? Because it's like I was saying before, like when you're when you're modeling or when you're creating images, the the result is usually a 2D image, right? More often than not, it's a flat image that needs something to it, right? Whether it's like just atmosphere effects or whatever. And if you can't, if you can't paint very well, or your painting ability doesn't keep up with your modeling ability, eventually you're gonna have to paint it. So what do? You kind of you run into a lot of problems that way. So just things to keep in mind. Oops, there you go. So like kind of just paints. I just wanted to like simplify some of that just to kind of get it like working a little bit nicer. And what I'd like to do is I'll take the entire like thing that I'm doing there, I'll duplicate it up, and then I'll clip it in, set it on darker color, and just like move it around and see like what cut lines, what things kind of work nicely, That's a cool shape right there. And you don't have to use the whole thing, but there are times where it's like, oh yeah, that works out. Boom. I can do some of that. And then like now that I'm introducing some things, right? I can like kind of make that match up right there. Boom. I introduced this line right here where some of the, this kind of seam meets up right there, and it doesn't continue the whole way through, but now I can just do that, right? I could just go, I need that to continue on. And you could do it with just a regular brush. You could do that with your smudge tool as well. Just drag that. Oops. Sometimes the drag doesn't work so much, but it is what it is. I can kind of straighten that out a bit. There you go. Sick. And there you go, free cut lines. All right. Sick.
If you knew that you were going to do way more shots using this, like if it was a major part of a project you were doing, would you take that model a lot further then, rather than having to like do this same paint job each time?
Yeah, it just like it kind of depends on what I'm doing, right? If they need other views, was that yesterday that we talked about it? There was a question that was brought up, I think it was yesterday, where it's how much attention do you give certain parts, right? Certain designs and stuff like that, because you could spend literally forever doing it, right? And it's the same idea. It's how important is this design? Because if this is something that just kind of sits in the background and it's like whatever, it's like, yeah, I'll literally just give them a flat thing, right? Because it's not really that important. I don't want to spend all that time modeling because I have to model and then paint it up later as well. So I'll just kind of like do a quick model, paint like this and hand it off, and then the modeler will actually just handle the rest, right? Or whoever's doing it. But if it's like a hero prop where it's like, this is super important, this is the car that the main character is gonna be riding around in or whatever, yeah, I'll really give it the attention that it needs. I'll kind of do a full turnaround model, very similar to that dune buggy. That's about the level that I'll ever turn things in at, just because my level is limited when it comes to modeling. So there's that idea, as well as I'm not the modeler, somebody else is, so they're gonna, they're paid to do that. You know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, I won't. I don't take it farther than I need to. So, because that's just a waste of time. It's I could be hanging out with my cats. Boom, boom, boom. And it's a lot of this. It's a lot of just like zooming in and out, and just kind of like seeing like, does that work? Is that cool? Is that interesting? Boom. Oh. Anybody have any questions? Let's do that. Let's get this. There are a couple things I wanted to bring up, but I'll bring it up later. We're still The day is still young. The night? Y'all's night. My 11:43 a.m. You're in commission hell right now. Not much to say. Commission hell. What does that look like? Is there like how much work is hell? How much is? I am curious. For some people, it's like, you know, one or two paintings. Others like, oh, I'm doing like a 50-page project. Not me, but I'm just saying for some people. Boom. Let's go. Sick. Got some questions typing out. I'll check those. Boom. I'm wondering, how do you get into the cab of this truck, though? That's a good question, right? And that's something for future Kenny to figure out. That is it. Yeah, that is a good question. I will say it's things that I don't. It's not that I'm not worried about it right now, because we'll figure it out, right? But there are like different ways we can do that. You know, this whole top could like move out. You could go through the back, like there's maybe a door like back here somewhere, like, you know, through the back window or something. I don't know, right? But that does bring up a good thing that was asked. I think it's by you yesterday. So for everybody, there's always this question, right? It's how much function do I need to include in my designs, right? Because whenever we are designing and things like that, there's this fight that happens where you need to make it look like it works, but then you want to make something that looks cool, right? Because you can't just make things that are like abstract, because, you know, it doesn't really work that way, right? Because, you know, when you actually like kind of need to build it, right? Or at least the modeler needs to make it, you know, you're in this like this fight of, you know, we need, like, you know, things need to have doors, things need to have joints. There's a functionality to it. Does it look like it can hold weight? All that stuff, right? And so as artists, there's a balance that we need to strike, right? Because you can't just make anything willy-nilly, or, you know, you get that like, oh, that really doesn't look believable at all. That doesn't look like it works kind of thing, right? And to a certain degree, that matters, right? But I do want to emphasize, to a certain degree, right? And what does this mean? Because when we're designing things, right? You know, we always hear that idea of like function over form, right? It needs to actually work, and that's more of an engineering term that people kind of talk about. You know, when you design, it needs to function, right? What I would highly recommend for mostly students, professionals, you can do whatever you want, right? But for mostly for students, right, is aim for form first, right? And the reason I say that, even though, right, the common understanding is, you know, this thing, it needs to look functional, right? Because generally speaking, most things you can make pretty functional pretty quickly, right? It's like, you know, like for example, you need a door, I'll just add a cut line. I'll like boom, boom, and boom, right? And this whole thing opens up. Maybe this whole wheel kind of like opens side. You can just make something up. You know what I mean? It's really easy to like make that work, right? Or even like this whole freaking like cockpit can just open like a jet. You know how like jets can kind of open. You climb through the front. Or this whole like grill right here can kind of like move downwards, right? Like that, and you just walk in like almost like a handicap access for, like, you know, the front of a car. And you could do a lot of those things, and it's really easy to make that work out, but it's really hard to make something actually look like, you know, that you want to actually drive it, you want to actually use it, or you actually want to see that in game, right? Because the key thing to remember for everybody is that the stuff that we do isn't actually built. No one's actually building this car, right? You know, there might be a modeler that makes it, right? It might show up in an animation, it might show up in whatever, but the physics of real life doesn't really pertain to this vehicle. There needs to be a perceived function, right? Things need to look like they work, but they don't have to actually work. Even in theme park, where the thing gets built, it's not that you can just do wacky, crazy things, but there's some leeway there, right? It doesn't have to 100% be real, because if we design something with 100% realism, you just get the most boring shit ever, right? Because, think about like some of the military vehicles that you've seen, right? Where it's like, there's some where it's like, oh, that's an engineer built that, right? Where it's like, it has everything it needs and it looks a certain way and it's cool, but there's no aesthetic appeal. And then there's like the classic designs where it's like, it looks like amazing, it's functional, but also looks good, right? Usually a designer is part of that. And so there's things that you can do to kind of make that happen, right? There's the base function, right? This is a car, there's a chair inside, right? There's wheels, right? Those are things that we can't really, I mean, we can even get around the wheels, right? If you just do like a hovercraft. But generally speaking, there's things that you can't get away from, but most of the time you can explain things away, right? And so the reason I recommend a lot of students really focus on getting your aesthetic, your forms right, is because dialing back something that looks unrealistic is a lot easier than it is to dial something up from realistic to interesting. Because first and foremost, what we do, right, our job is to create something that looks interesting, right? Because when they see this in the game, when they play this vehicle, when they watch this movie, whatever it is, you have to get somebody to go, I want to play with that one, like I want that car in my on my team, or I want to do this thing, you know what I'm saying? And you have to get the audience to do that. When you're making characters, right? You can make the most realistic person ever, but if they're not interesting characters, you end up with whatever that one hero shooter game that just came out was, right? It's like you get stuff like that where it's like, I mean, there's other reasons, but the characters not being ideal, not being interesting was part of that reason, right? I'm not saying they were super realistic or anything, but that's the whole point. You have to get people to like these characters. You have to get people to like these things, and that's what we're focusing on. And so when you focus too much on function, it kind of gets boring, right? Or there's a tendency to get boring. With all that being said, there are projects where you need to be a little bit more realistic, right? There's like Call of Duty projects, or there's like, projects that are like more in the realistic kind of realm. Those are fine, right? You can, you want to be realistic with those, but you just have to remember what project you're in, right? For students, most of the time we're looking for something interesting, right? As long as it like looks like it like kind of works, you'll probably be okay. But more often than not, students don't really think about that, so it becomes a real problem, because then it's just like, oh, I'm just looking at something that it works, but there's no aesthetic appeal to it. It's like, I don't want to play this. I don't want to use this weapon. Just imagine playing a game and you get like a normal ass sword. It's like, I don't want that. I want the giant, buster blade to like hack through things, because that's the fun one. That's the one that's cool. Or do you want the very realistic, other weapon? It's like, I mean, you might. There's some games that are like that for sure, but when the whole game is based in like a fantasy realm or whatever, right? Talking about Final Fantasy, in case you guys couldn't tell. Sorry, there's like jets everywhere right now. What's happening here? It's if your game is kind of based in a fantasy kind of realm, you want something more interesting, right? And that's what we hire for, because most people can do realistic, right? But they can't do design that well. You know what I'm saying? So things to think about. Oops, what's happening here? Why are you on screen? Who does that? There you go.
Hi Kenny, I have a question.
What's up, dude?
So during this rendering phase, do we really need to render that much?
Yeah.
Or we can, like I see sometimes that there are some concepts, I'm talking about for video game, for game studios, not for movie. Uh, sometimes we see they have a really like the concept. They are not a lot of render on, but they have the photo to show the texture on the side to give an idea for what material is that thing.
Mhm.
So do we really need to render, and how much we need to render?
Um, so that, okay, there's a couple there's a complicated answer to that, right? Because yes, for those that don't know, when you work in games and movies, even animation, to be completely honest, um, oftentimes you can just do like, I mean, shit, even something like these, right? Like, you could do something pretty loose, right? And then just kind of say, hey, this is that material. Just literally link a photo to the thing, call it a day, right? That does happen in production. Absolutely, it does, right? But you're not in production. You're trying to get into production. You're trying to get into production, right? And so, what we want to see is that you can actually paint and you can fully realize a prop or a design, because we're gonna need you to do that sometimes. You know what I mean? So like, for example, there's gonna be some studios uh, where you have to spell everything out, right? I'm not gonna name who or anything, but there are studios where we worked with them, and we have to design props, right? Or we had to do some props, and then literally, like, I'm not kidding, like, we had to tell them that something like this is a highlight, not a color change on the material, right? It's not a flat, like, it rotates, so there's a highlight on that corner, right? Like, that's pretty, we know this, right? But we had to spell that out for them. We had to like actually separate the highlight and be able to turn it off and on so they can see what the base material is and what the highlight material is, or what the highlight color looks like. And you have to like kind of paint around that. And like, this is a legit thing that we did, and it sounds crazy, but it's just like, sometimes you have to spell things out, and not being able to is a big problem, right? It's not that you'll always need to do it, it's that you have to have the skill to do so. Does that make sense? Because, right, like, we're not looking for the bare minimum, right? We're looking for a range of abilities. When we ask you to like design stuff, right, we're like, hey, I need to see your portfolio. You could turn in just a bunch of sketches. I'm like, wow, look at that design skill, great. But then I'm looking for render skill as well. I'm looking for all these other things to kind of help me understand that you can fully realize a design. So when you render in your portfolio, right, you want to make sure that you are showing that full range, because you have loose sketches like this, which is like, cool, it's like not a big deal, perspective's off or things are off or whatever, but it's like, it's mostly about the design. And then you show them the 3/4 view, assumedly this when it's finished. But when you see something like this, you're like, oh, okay, cool. They can take it from start to finish, right? Boom. And then whether it's in 3D or not, it doesn't really matter on the application, right? Because, um, if you're somebody that works mostly in 3D or whatever, and you want to show like, oh, I did a 3D render, that's great, because that's what they need. They just need to see that the idea is fully realized, but it's showing that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Cool. It's tough. I think like for everybody, right? It's like the portfolio. It's not a real representation of what we do in studio. It's a representation of what you're capable of doing, because there's so many random things I'll pop up. They're like, hey, we just need this like weird glass thing rendered, right? And we have the model. We already made it. The modeler already did the thing, and then you're like, can you just like do this real quick? We just need a, like, don't 3D model it or anything and render it out. Like, can you just paint this? We just need this in the next hour. That happens a lot, right? I mean, that's a real production request, right? It happens so often. And if you're unable to paint, you're unable to actually like, create images well, right? Just through the foundations. It causes problems because now, you can't do some things. You're unable to kind of, you're like, you literally have to tell them, I can't do it in that time. I have to set up my file, I have to do these things or whatever. And they're like, okay, well, we'll just ask the other artist. And then, when it's time to like get promotions, get raises or whatever, they're like, well, you're pretty good, but you're missing some skills, some critical skills that we need, and just I think you need to work on your kind of fundamentals a bit more. That legit happens. They'll be like, you're not really reliable in a studio scenario. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying you, but I am referencing somebody, but I'm not talking about you. It's a very real problem, I will say. Boom. And for everybody too, like, understand, like, when you look at your favorite artists, whoever it is, right? Like, always, every single time, without fail, right? Always. They are people that are usually, I mean, without fail, right? They are always able to draw and paint really well. Doesn't matter if there's somebody that if they use 3D really well, right? It doesn't matter how good at rendering they are in Blender and modeling and all that stuff. The people that are the best, that we all consider the best artists in the world, right? They always can draw and paint really well. At the very minimum, maybe they don't always show it, right? There's artists that, like Jama's stuff, for example, right? Like, we see a lot of 3D from him, and like Mache and all that stuff, right? Some of the best artists in the world. We see a lot of 3D from them. But you look at their like 2D work and it's mind-blowingly good. They're just using other tools, right? And that's because that's what it is. You're just using other tools. And so, when you're like working on your skills and figure out what's important, that is the most important, right? Just understanding that you got to get good at drawing and painting. That is the bare minimum, right? Yes, you need to know some 3D at this point in time, right? You need to start figuring it out. But the level of 3D that I bring to the table, like, really isn't that high, but it's usually enough to kind of get me through most productions, right? I've never, like, games, films, animation, theme park, right? The amount of 3D that I bring to the table is usually enough, right? And so the bar really isn't that high for 3D, right? There's some places, like, that you really have to kind of like take it pretty far. But if you can paint, if you can design, if you can, like, offer something, generally speaking, that's what they're looking for more often than not, Wait, okay, cool. That's not a question. Sick. Let's go. So, I'm just kind of going. We're just gonna kind of do this for a second. We have one more part of the demo to kind of do, right? There's like, there's another section to this I'm gonna get to in a bit, but we'll get there once I kind of render this a bit further. I just kind of want to show you like how we kind of go about things and how close I'm actually getting into this. A big problem that I see a lot is just the ability to render, right? Like, because in school, generally speaking, most of us, like, we're, when we take classes and do things, it's always like, oh, hey, do some thumbnails, right? Because, the amount of thumbnails you do in a class, right, versus like how many times you actually render something, right? Because the first couple weeks is always like an insane amount of thumbnails. Basically every class, most classes, at least for my class, there's always like a ton of rapid ideation, right? But then eventually you kind of start bringing those numbers down and you start like actually rendering more, right? But the amount of rendered paintings you do is like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 maybe, right? That's midterm and final, right? But then thumbnails, right? You're doing hundreds, right? Like 1 week might have 100 thumbnails in it, and that's kind of where whenever I see a lot of student work, there's a imbalance of of what of that kind of skill, right? Because we don't really render that much, and so that skill is usually missing. So when we're told like, hey, you need to do a portfolio piece, you need to do whatever, we're always like missing something. It's always like very hard to take it past that thumbnail stage because you've never actually done it, you know. Same thing for those that do like figure drawing, right? If you ever do figure drawing and you're somebody that, like, especially like people in animation, I don't want to say people in animation, but generally people that are in animation, that they do a lot of gesture drawing, right? They do a lot of, because that's, you know, that's one of the bigger things that animation focused people, not animation the skill, animation, the industry, right? That's what they kind of focus on a lot, right? The gesture, the kind of pose and stuff like that. But the full like 3 hour figure session, right? How many people have, like, how many have you actually done, right? Because I've probably done thousands, if not tens of thousands of like gesture drawings, right? Where it's like, you know, 2 minutes max, 5 minutes, whatever. No, 5 minutes is probably too long for a gesture, but, you know, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, right? And then, you know, you do one long pose at the end, which is usually like 30 minutes or something like that. So it's 1 to like at least 20, right? And then that just happens. And then on top of that, like, there's every challenge, every new thing, that everything that happens on like social media, it's always like how quick you can do something. So we never actually get that practice. But one of the biggest things that that we do as concept artists is actually rendering, right? Because a big problem with a lot of the, I guess, things that we do as students, right? Or as just artists as a whole, we always want to do the loose indicated thing, right? Because that's what's like the cool thing to do, right? It's like the quick thumbnails and the, you know, you do a model and you kind of like loosely brush over the top, and hopefully you have something that like kind of looks interesting and gestural, right? That's what's promoted on social media so much. Like, that's everybody, you know? Every cool artist that you know, generally speaking, they're probably doing like quicker things. Mostly because of time, right? Because, you know, doing a full render, right? A full on painting, like, you know, every month I do one, right? And that's not just because of the speed of this stream. It's a lot of it is because I don't have time to just sit there and just render something all day, right? Because I have work, I have a life, I have, I don't know, desires as a human being to not sit here all day. You know what I mean? Like, there's other things that I have going on in my life. And so I don't really want to sit down and render all day. So I'll want to do something, right? I'll want to paint. I'll just do a quick study. No big deal, right? And for a professional, it's fine because you're already working. Who cares? But for students, you have to understand you need to be able to finish things because that's actually our job. Because, for example, like some people, a lot of people like doing like models and then like loose paint overs on top. And that's the exact opposite of what most, at least entry level artists do, right? Because we already have modelers, so your model is not going to beat theirs, right? So you're already losing in that regard. And then what the modelers need is a clean render because they need to know what the material looks like when they start, you know, rendering and texturing and, you know, look deving the thing or whatever, right? Like, there's a whole, like, you know, like, because what this painting is a guide, right? It's a you know, it's a look, this is what it's supposed to look like, now go build it, right? That's what this is. And if you paint something super loose over a model, the model's useless because we have a modeler, and then the painting's useless because there's no real material design on the thing to fully realize what the thing looks like. And so you can kind of see how basically the whole image becomes useless. You know what I mean? It sounds funny, but I mean, that's what it is. You know, we need people that can actually paint and actually like finish things off. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten work literally just because they're like, oh wow, we really like that you can paint. I was like, that's bare minimum, you know? They're like, because I've gotten jobs where they're like, you know, we called you because we really like that you can just kind of paint things up. You know, you don't really rely on like modeling and things too much because we have a modeling team for that. I was like, yeah, I mean, that's because that's our job at the end of the day, right? Because so many people, they want to just model things out, and hopefully someone's like, hey, you're using those kit bash assets so interestingly. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of like, your kit bash assets, and then with like smudge brush on top, and when people look at your portfolio, they just see that, and that's not what we do at all. Like you can't do that at all, because that's not our job, right? So long-winded rant, but something that we need a refresher on every once in a while. Cool. Let's get it, boy. So I'm gonna I'll continue this in my own time. This render, right? I'll do it as I go, but for everybody, right? Make sure that this kind of feels done as you're like when you're getting into your I guess your like next phase, like the material phase, right? Right now, we're in the forms phase, right? We're just trying to get the major forms correct and get the planes, at least kind of working okay, because that's what we need the most, right? But once you get to this point, you're like, let's say I was done, right? Now we need to start getting into the materials. So that's what we're gonna do right about now. Okay, so I have a vehicle that is quote unquote done, right? Done with the material side. So this is the kicker, and it's super easy. I've done a demo on this before, but what I want you to do is treat this like a kind of base material, and then all you need to do is duplicate your image, right? The whole truck. There's two of them now, right? I just duplicated the thing, right? Pretty simple. And you're just gonna colorize it, right? So you're gonna, take the thing, and you can click Command U, or just click the hue saturation adjustment, right? Click colorize, and then start putting it in the zone that you're kind of looking for, right? And this is just gonna get us started. This isn't like the only thing we do, but it's gonna get us so far. So I want to do red. So I was looking at this. I like this right here. Hold up. Sorry, mouse keeps disappearing. Honda K-Truck. I think Honda released a K-Truck recently or something. I don't know what it is. But I thought this was really cool. I kind of like where that's going. But I also have the camera involved. I also have, some other references in mind as well, like the lobster, right? Red lobster, right? And so there's some design cues that I'm going to take from this, as well as the camera, right? But I have my base color. Everything is like kind of working out okay, right? And then all you need to do is mask it out and then brush it back where you want it, right? So in this case, I actually want the whole base car to actually be red, because I need most of it to be red. And then what I'm actually going to do is take this and I'm going to levels this out. Just get it in like the black range, for example, right? Something like, if it's like a black metal or a black material, I'm going to mask that out and then start just, figuring out what my pattern is going to be. So in this case, you could do it a couple different ways. What I would actually highly recommend doing, not this way to begin with, is actually just brush inside of your mask and figure out like, what your value ranges actually look like. So this is what I was intending on doing. Boom, something like that. We'll get something like that. I want this lip to be part of that. Sick. And then get all that in there. Boom. So I was planning to do something like this, and then I had an idea to do this section up here. Boom, 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 boom. Let's get that. I want that visor to be kind of like that. Know what I'm saying? All right. Get that. Oops. Not around that. Right? So now I'm getting a good representation of like kind of where this vehicle is going, and I don't have to worry so much about actually painting every damn material, right? Because every material is a little bit different. We're going to make those changes coming up in a bit, but for now, just understand that like, I have the freedom to, kind of adjust things. Like, oh, I don't really like that. Let me add some more. Let me take away. You know, you can play with that rather than, you know, you're like halfway through rendering it in full color, and then you're like, I don't really like that. You know, it's like, I don't really think it's working out, right? Like, you can control that now versus before, because you're like, I don't really like that black. Let me, you know, let me adjust that. Let me, what if it was white? You know, what if it was like silvery, you know, or whatever. You know, you could do a white vehicle. You could do, I don't know, color vehicle of sorts, right? I can like, instead of being pure black, it can be like, oh, what if it's like a greenish color or something? I don't know. That looks dumb. Don't do that. That's bad color combo. Blue and cyan. That's not bad, right? But we can mess with it now, right? We can play with things. We can adjust things, and this is one of the bigger things I'd highly recommend. At least, you know, allow yourself to be able to plan your vehicle this way, right? So this is why we spend so long doing this base view, because we can then, you know, add the colors and things that we want, right? So you're probably asking, for those that are good at color, right? There is a lack of color diversity here, right? And what I would do, once you kind of get to this phase to where everything's looking pretty okay, what you can do is group all these together, right? You're kind of, you know, let's just say I was doing this correctly or whatever. You can duplicate the whole thing, merge it down, and you have your flat vehicle now. And let's say I have an ambient light that's kind of like coming off to the side, like a blue sky ambient light, right? You can lighten up the vehicle because that's what's going to happen, right? It's going to catch some of that light. And then you can color balance it. You can add some bluish tone to it, right? And then you can mask it out and go to all your top planes and address where it needs to go, right? You can just lasso it out and get you somewhere close, right? Because now you just have that full control over how the vehicle is actually being rendered. You don't have to worry about like repainting materials or doing a bunch of things because, you know, now we don't need to do that, right? It's not the best solution for the most realistic car, but it is the easiest, if that makes sense, right? And this is the kind of themes that I keep kind of coming across in my or keep trying to like push in all of my streams. It's not about what's the best and most artistic way to do it. It's what's the most manageable way to do it, because there is so much to do already, right? Everything is so damn difficult. So what I don't want to like say that you have to paint everything and be amazing at color theory, amazing at material indication, amazing at design, and all these other things all at the same time, because it's fucking hard, right? We know this. So what can we do to make it bite-sized, manageable pieces, right? That's what we're looking for. If you can do that, it's going to make your job so much easier. So hopefully that makes sense. You know, now I have control. Like, let's just say I was done with that, right? I have my cooler ambient light kind of there. You can turn that down if you want. You can add some kind of main lights, right? If I do the same thing but with like a front kind of yellowish light, you can do the same thing. And you're essentially kind of working in that level of render or level of detail just like you would like a model, right? Where like, I want the ambient light, so you put it over there. I want the kind of yellowish warm light up front. You do that. And you slowly kind of work through this this process, right? So that's the breakdown. I'm gonna kind of continue, you know, doing this in like, I'm not gonna work in the grayscale, but I'm gonna start kind of actually defining what pieces I want, red, black, and other colors and stuff, and then we'll go from there. So cool. And that's about it. For those that I'm not done, but you know, like that's the demo, right? Just making sure that we keep things separate and do things in a bite-sized, manageable ways, right? So hopefully that helps. I hope, unless you guys are just like all pros and you're like, nah, we knew that already. We already do shit like that, Kenny. You're just late to the game, dog. That low-key looks like a racing truck. You're right. And it's not low-key. I promise you that was the intention. Because, for those that know, for those that like, know, this is actually a track bike in the back. It's not a... it was designed to be like a track bike rather than like some commuter bike. So speed is the name of the game. Boom. Let's see. I will say, for everybody doing this, get good at using the pen tool. Like lasso tool is good for like looser things, but when you start learning how to use the pen tool, it makes all of this like so much easier. I know pen tool can be kind of like difficult, to say the least. Boom. But now it's like second nature. Let's see, something like that, something like that. Just get up there. Wait, what am I doing? Yeah, I need... There you go, that's fine. Boom, G. There you go. Cool. Oh, we had a question in the live stream yesterday. So for those that don't know, right? If you're watching this, you can ask questions throughout the week, and if it's like if it's a pretty easy answer, I'll just give it to you then and there. But if it's something that's a little bit bigger, right? I'll actually answer it on stream. So, question was, how do you like kind of schedule out time to improve? Right? I'll actually read the question straight up. Where is it at? General? No, it's in the Livestream Plus. General? Wait, nope, it's in questions. There you go. All right. Okay, what would be a good / realistic approach for setting daily, weekly, monthly goals for studies? Skill level, he said skill level like his. There's a lot to cover in terms of fundamentals, and even in a project, and being able to clear your path to focus on improving your current level at the same time you produce work is important. By writing down these goals might help. Okay, so the idea being, how do you improve some of the like, how do you improve skills? Because for one, there's already so much to do, right? You're already doing, like, you're already having to do so much with like just doing, for one, like classwork, and then you have like skills that you want to learn, and then skills that you have to learn, and then all sorts of stuff, right? And it can be overwhelming. It can be a little much, and it ends up kind of like you could end up actually not doing any of it, essentially. You know what I mean? And so for everybody out there, really, you professionals as well, just pick something. Like I think one of the bigger things for me, and it sounds so funny, like, is like when you have, I don't know how many people get decision paralysis. Maybe I'm just useless. Who knows? But like, you get decision paralysis. You're like, I can't decide. It's like, I get this with food all the time. We're like, what do you want to eat? I don't know. I kind of want it all. It's like, I don't really know. And you end up kind of not doing anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, you want all of it. It's all fine, but you don't know which one you want more. And then you just end up in this zone of like, yeah, I don't know. You know what I mean? You almost like give up in a sense, right? Studies can kind of be the same way, right? There's a, there's this, I don't know, just like thing that happens where it's like when there's too much, right? You're just overwhelmed, especially with what we do, right? You end up just not knowing what you want, and then you kind of just end up not doing anything, and that's a problem because you don't really get anywhere if you don't do anything, right? And so what I would recommend for everybody is just pick a topic, right? Just pick something. It doesn't really matter where, because the intention is you're gonna do all of it. You're gonna get there. It's all the same. It's literally it doesn't really matter what you do, because you're gonna get to it eventually, but you have to create that schedule. So what I used to do was, I just make a wheel. Not, I didn't like physically make the wheel, but in my mind, there's like a wheel of things you got to do, right? There's like, I gotta get better at drawing. I got to get better at painting. I got to get better at design. I got to get better at like specific things in design, like form language, like environment paintings, like characters or whatever, right? And just pick one, because if you make that list it's just a schedule, right? It's just like, okay, I'm gonna do drawings this week, this month, right? Whichever duration of time. I recommend, to be honest, I recommend about a month of time, or maybe 2 weeks at the very least, of doing something daily to get better at that one topic. So if it's like I need to get better at drawing, well, what are you drawing, right? I want to do some studies of real life things or whatever. So you start building that kind of vocabulary, right? And you start drawing for those 2 weeks, and then when those 2 weeks are done, move on. It doesn't matter how good you actually are at the thing. It just matters that you moved on, right? Because that's, for me, one of the biggest things that I see a lot is people don't move on, right? Yes, you're not at the level that you need to be at, but you'll never be at the level that you want to be at. So what, you know what I mean? Like you have to address some of these other skills, at least for a little bit. And so what I'd recommend is just pick one, right? Pick one. That's the flavor of the month, right? This is what I'm going to be doing for, this month or these 2 weeks. And then I'll move on to the next one. But the key is when you do these studies, right? Let's say, for example, I need to work on my lighting ability, my ability to create light, right? Like, when you're painting an environment, for example, like what we do, right? Or what I mostly do. What you're going to want to do is do the study, right? Do the thing where it's like, I have my plein air, I have my, whatever it is that you're doing. And then what you're going to want to do is do your own version of that, right? So you do the plein air of like a sunset waterfall, or if you have a waterfall near you, great, that's dope, right? Some people don't. But if you do something, right, where it's like there's a neighborhood, right? So cool. Or I went downtown and I saw like these cool buildings. Great, right? Do that view, look at it, paint it, with gouache or whatever, and then that same painting, right? Do a version of it. Now it's not this city. It's not the city you live in. It's the sci-fi city. It's the fantasy city. It's the castle, right? Or the assortment of castles, whatever. And apply it, right? Because that's the biggest skill. It's take it and apply it. Because if you can't apply it, then you're not really learning anything. Because the issue with studies and doing constant studies, it gets us kind of like confident in our skills, right? Because you're like, wow, I really made this thing. I made that design happen. Look at that. That painting's beautiful, And generally speaking, right? Most studies and stuff, if you're doing it well, right? It looks pretty good. But it's misleading because you didn't actually design that. All you did was copy it. And that's the problem. You know what I'm saying? You didn't really design that lighting scenario. You just copied from real life. And so the answer is right in front of you, And so what you do is, okay, I have the sunset. I saw this cool raking light. And as you're studying, right, you see these like cool little moments where it's like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have put this light there. I wouldn't have like made the cloud that way or whatever. And then go into your painting, take that same level of thought. What did I learn? Apply it, right? Be like, okay, cool. I saw this light here, this really cool like shaft of light kind of coming through the buildings. Let me do something like that for my painting, And you create the same type of painting. It doesn't need to be the same angle or even the same like setting or anything, but do a city, right? If you studied a city, paint a city, right? And you can kind of start making those decisions, right? Because that's what you want to be doing with like master copies, right? How many of you have done a master copy? I don't want to say you got cocky afterwards. Like, I legit did, where it's like, wow, I did that line decker copy, dude. I'm like so good, man. And then you actually do a painting, you're like, man, I'm trash. Like, what's wrong with me? You know what I mean? Like, because it's easy, because the dude did it for you. You know what I mean? That's his painting, and so it gives you this false confidence of like, how did they do this? How did they make this painting? And you need to apply what you learned, because now when you apply it, you're making decisions. Because when you see a face or you see like a building, you have to decide, oh, how am I going to light that? And then why did they light it this way in that painting, but in my painting I didn't, right? And it's usually graphic read issues or whatever. It's like I'm missing something, right? And you're forced to make decisions that you wouldn't normally make, right? That's why we do it. And so just kind of remember that, right? That's, it's the application that actually is one of the more important things that I want you to remember. After that, just move on, right? You're not going to be the best at whatever it is that you're doing in 1 month, right? You're going to be 30 to 31 paintings better, right? But you're not going to be hopefully 30, if you did something every day, right? More likely like 20 paintings better, right? And that's amazing, right? That's so much better. And then move on, do something else, because you want to apply that skill to other things. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'd recommend, Andrea, for you asking. For those that don't know, ask by a specific person. But it's super important to like just move on, just do something else, because if you don't, you get kind of stuck in this pattern of like, oh, I'm doing all these studies, but whenever I go to paint my own thing, it just looks dumb. Like, I don't know why it doesn't look good. You know what I mean? Like, you ever get that? Like, where you've been doing plein airs, and your plein airs turn out pretty good, or your photo studies turn out great, but then you actually go and to try and like make your own version of something, and it's like the colors aren't sophisticated anymore. Your whole design language is like bad. I don't say bad, but just not as good as like when you're doing copies. You know what I mean? And that's usually the reason, right? So, boom. Let's see. Let's get that. What's happening here? Why did that not mask out? Oops. What the? Wait, hold up. There you go. Cool. How's life, guys? There's like 20 of you in here. No one's asking a question. Can't have that. We can't roll like that, guys. Let's see. Boom.
Whenever you add the patterns into your vehicle, like what would be your like suggestion, like as to like how would it be, like what would you consider an effective like decal design on a vehicle?
Ooh, great question, man. Great question. So, question is, basically, what do you think about when you're designing things, right? So, there's a couple things that you want to consider, right? There's things that you need to kind of understand. Hold on, let me clear some of this out real quick. Boom. There you go. Let me... Boom, and boom. There it is. Sorry, I was making that windshield area. So there's a couple of things that you want to think about, right? There is, like, for example, for me, there is an actual, like, vehicle that I'm kind of referencing, right? We saw this a second ago, right? It's an existing car, so we're kind of like, I don't say paying homage to, but we're doing things, right, that match, right? Okay, so with that in mind, there's also other mentalities, right? There's like, you're referencing something, for example, Daniel Simon. If you guys don't know who Daniel Simon is, look him up. He's disgustingly good. There it is. Yeah. So you can also do other things, right? For example, like specifically a car. What is that? Oh, that's my camera. Specifically a car, right? He's referencing like a box of film, right? Because Kodak Gold is a very specific film, and he's just using that as like a livery, right? That's one way to do it. We're referencing something, and you're kind of paying homage to something, right? That's one way. And there's like, for a vehicle specifically, there's liveries, right? For those that don't know, car livery. It's called a livery. The application of stickers and patterns on a car is called a livery. You can look these up, and you can like reference these things, right? There's like the jets, the World War I, II jets or whatever. They had that shark mouth on it or whatever. There's stuff like that. You can reference those things, and they say something. They mean something, right? There's a connotation with it, especially like when you look at some of these some of these are kind of like gaudy or whatever, but you know, some like this one has a old feel to it, right? Where it's like, oh, that's like a World War II esque. I don't know when that pattern's from, but you know, it's on like the side of like old planes and stuff. And that's an old looking car, so it's like, oh, maybe that's kind of cool. Or you want something a little more, you know, whatever, right? Vehicles have a like designs and stuff to it, but when there isn't a design, right? When you have something like, let's say, a character, or you have, you know, props or things that don't really have those types of patterns on it, or not a consistent pattern thing, right? What you can do is think about it as a graphic design kind of push, right? So, for example, if I did this, let's just reverse this one real quick. Right? Okay. So, what happens here, obviously, I just clicked invert. So, you know, it's not the coolest thing we've ever seen. But this is an option, right? And what happens is I lose a graphic read that I had. I'll do this in green so you can see it. Yeah, there you go. So we lose the windshield. What the? Brown. We lose this kind of windshield. The graphic read, right, kind of disappears on that windshield because a second ago I had the... Oops. Boom. I had the red kind of like creating this this, you know, windshield section, so you know it looks, you know, like it's like the value range is brighter on that red side versus like the black, so it's kind of highlighting like that window area pretty well, right? And so if there's a graphic read component associated with this, you want to make sure that when you're designing, you're thinking about like, where's that graphic read coming to, right? Especially like with characters where I need their face to stand out or something. So you don't want something too contrasty like towards the foot, unless that's something important, right? You're designing like how to get someone to look somewhere, right? At the end of the day, when you design your graphics or your images and stuff on your vehicles, right? You want somebody to look somewhere. You don't, you know, at the very least, have someone focus on something, because there's certain parts of the car that you want people to look at. There's other parts of the car where it's like, don't look at the truck bed, you know, who cares? All right. It's not that big a deal, but you do want someone to look at like the windshield area. Right. And so, for example, if I had this windshield like this, and I was like, well, let's bring a little bit more attention to this. What if I did something like this, right? Where I just made it green, right? And so for those that know color theory, right, I have this red car and I have this green tinted windshield, right? It's a complementary color. So now the contrast not only is in the value range, but also in the hue, right? The complementary colors, and then the saturation. It's like a desat green versus like the fully saturated red. And you're just kind of playing with that, right? We're just, you know, going back and forth and trying to find like, hey, what works, what doesn't work, you know? You create attention, you bring the eye and the focus somewhere, and from there, you know, you can just kind of play with it more and, you know, figure things out. But that's the kind of core idea, right? It takes a bit of practice to kind of like really understand what you're doing, but it's not just like, I'm not just randomly putting something somewhere. I'm trying to force the audience to like look at something. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Thank you.
Dope. Dude, that's like the best question you ever asked me, man. I'm so proud of you.
Just random G moment, I guess.
That's what I'm saying, man. You got some gold nuggets every once in a while. I'll give you that. Let's all strive to be G's level of
Kenny, I got a question.
What's up, dog?
This might be like too much or too broad of a question.
It's not
feel
enough.
Free to like take it whatever direction, but so we talked about gouache, right? I ordered the stuff; it's coming. I plan on doing kind of studies similar to what you were talking about earlier from life. I also want to get better just at like specifically targeting graphic read, like value stuff like that for, I guess, like imaginated and environments for imagination, right? So I want to just do like a bunch of really small thumbnails on like index cards to practice. Do you have like any tips, like process-wise, starting that out? Should I only do what you were talking about earlier, where it's like, okay, I've done the study from life, now I'll do something similar to that? Or if I mixed up something in between that was more free form, would you have any recommendations on that?
Yeah, like I mean, like the suggestion earlier was like do the study and then like do a version of your own. But you're saying like, is there anything else you can do like in between that? Is that what you're asking?
Like, if do you think it's a if you do like these little cards, right? Should, should you ever be doing it without a study done first? Is that like a terrible idea? Or if you did one without a study, how would you start them? Would you just do like a quick line sketch?
Gotcha. So, you could do it, however, right? That, I mean, that's the biggest thing. That's the most important thing to understand is it's up to you, right? It's what you want to learn. But the biggest thing that I find, especially with student work, is that they're not focusing on studying anything. They're just doing the motions, right? So, for example, how many of you have done film studies before, right? Pretty common. Film studies is very is a very common thing to do as students, right? Because I mean, everybody within like their first year. If you haven't done a film study yet, go do some film studies. Like it's healthy. It's good for you. Eat your vegetables, right? But for those of you that haven't, right, or that have, that you're you're doing something, but you don't always know what you're doing because the teacher is always like, okay, break it down to 2 or 3 values, right? And then you kind of go from there. And we do it and we kind of move on. But for example, in my class, I really push, like when you do a film study, like understand what you're trying to get from that film study. In our case, in World Building 2, for example, we're always trying to push our graphic read when it comes to film studies because that's what we're doing. We're breaking things down to 2 and 3 values, and then we're looking at the graphic read to understand the message, the meaning of this image, right? That's what we're doing. And so when you're actually doing that study, you get more out of it, right? Because there's a million things you can pull from a film study. You can pull you can learn how to do like color. Like I learned how to kind of get better at color painting through film studies. I didn't, instead of like the 2-minute timer, I set it for like 30 minutes or 10 minutes and I started painting with gouache, actual film studies, right? There's a million different things you could pull from a million different studies, but you got to know what it is, right? You have to focus on like, I want to learn this skill. I want to get better at color. I want to get better at graphic read. I want to get better at design. I want to get better at composition. And when you do the study, you want to focus on that. And the reason I bring this up is because when people do random things, right? For example, doing random thumbnails, because this is a very this is a very concept arty thing to do, right? You get your sketchbook and you do like a bunch of frames, right? Usually it's like 100, right? Because people that do this, generally speaking, they're those types of students. I've done it too, right? I've even gotten that assignment from my teachers. You do 100 thumbnails of just comps, right? But the issue is you don't know how to do comps, generally speaking, right? Because you're not, you're a student. You're learning this thing, so you're probably missing something. If you think you need to learn comps, you're probably missing something associated with comps, right? That's not unfair to say, right? So what are you learning? Because now you're just practicing a skill that I don't want to say you don't have, but you're not, you need to work on it. So there's a hole there, but then you're trying to fill it with material you don't have because usually it's like to learn something, you have to bring in new information. To practice something, you can, you can just kind of rinse and repeat, right? But that's the difference. Are you trying to practice or are you trying to learn? If you're trying to practice something you've already done, right? For example, if you've taken like a class of mine and I was like, hey, do some thumbnails and you want to practice that process over and over again, yeah, do that. That's great, right? But if you're trying to learn something and you're just kind of rinse and repeating like that, you're not actually learning anything. You're kind of going through trial and error, right? Yeah, you're gonna learn something just through the act of doing something. But generally speaking, you won't learn as much because you're having to figure out the answer, right? It's kind of like when you take a class versus self-teach. When you self-teach, you're having to discover things that are already discovered, right? Somebody already knows that information. And so, the fastest way is just to go ask them, right? like just to either watch a live stream, right? But not you, but for anybody. But the fastest way to learn something is just ask somebody, hey, how'd you do that, right? Sometimes you can't. I get that. So when you learn on your own, you're having to like kind of rediscover the wheel because no one's teaching this thing, and then you're kind of like coming to that conclusion. That could take forever, right? So that's kind of why I recommend doing a study first. At least know what you're doing. But once you get to a certain level, yeah, you can do comps. But just remember, like, why am I doing this comp? Is it for a project? Or am I just doing something that I hear everybody else is telling me to do? Because that issue by itself, for me, is one of the most detrimental things that you can do as an artist. I'm not saying that's what you're asking, but I'm saying for everybody listening, right? One of the worst things that you could do is see that somebody else is doing it and just mindlessly copy, right? And I say this now, and we're in September. We have 18 days until the fated Inktober happens. And this is for any challenge, to be completely honest. I'm not talking shit about Inktober or anything. Inktober is great. But it's when students do the Inktober and they're like, it's like you have a legit portfolio to do. You have legit skills that you need to learn. And you're like, I'm going to bust out ink and do that. I'm like, if you like busted out gouache, you could probably learn more. You could probably like in that 1 month, you could probably get good enough to like push you to that next level, right? But everyone else is doing it, but I want to do what everyone else is doing. And it's like, but you don't need to work on what they're working on, right? Because you're not missing skills that they're missing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to like shame anybody from doing things for Inktober, but what I want everyone to know is there's skills that you need to have, there's skills that you need to learn because there's things that you're missing, right? And you want to just remember, do I actually need this right now? Or do I need to work on something else? Because, like we established a second ago, there's a million different things that you need to know. Copying the masses, generally speaking, doesn't get you there, right? So just, think about that. Consider that while you're studying. Just remember, like when you do something, just know why you're doing it. Because if you don't know why you're doing it, you're not getting anything from it, because now you're kind of, there's, I think it was Shaq. I don't know why I'm referencing Shaq here, but there's the idea that practice makes perfect is practice makes permanent, right? If you blindly practice the same things over and over again, you kind of just end up creating bad habits for yourself, right? Because if you're missing the skill, if you're missing a component of something that you need to know, and then you're practicing it over and over again, you're just creating that bad habit to where when you actually work or when you're in a class, you're doing something that the teacher's like, oh yeah, don't do that. That's really bad, but you didn't know that, right? It's not your fault. It's just, things to kind of keep in mind. If you're for working professionals, you do whatever you want, right? That's, you're kind of like, this is mostly for people like trying to like learn something, because it's so easy to be like, oh, look, this person's doing super loose, gouache sketches, or this person's doing like, super loose like portrait paintings, It's like, you're an environment artist. What are you doing, man? You know what I mean? Like, not you, but for anybody, it's like, there's skills that you need that aren't being addressed. And any chance that you have, most of us don't have like, endless amounts of time on us. So, you want to use that time as effectively as possible, right? So, at least I do. That being said, I'm not trying to shame anybody from doing Inktober and stuff. Just letting you know. There's other things. And you can draw any time of the year. You don't have to wait till October. Just so you know, everybody. If that wasn't a known fact, you can draw whenever you want. Anybody do Inktober still? That was like so big whenever I was in school. I think after the lawsuit, everyone kind of like fell out of it. And so like
I feel like maybe it's. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. You're saying?
I feel like maybe it's not the new hotness anymore too, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's so many other things like Unreal right now that are like, oh.
Oh yeah, everybody wants to do
people are-
3D. Nobody
Obsessed
wants to
with
do
it.
2D anymore, man. That's fine though. That's fine. More jobs for me, right?
I like 3D a lot, but I feel like whatever I use, if I'm going full 2D or 3D on a project, because I do both, it's like immediately after that I want to go do the other one. I'm like, oh, I knew it. 2D was so much better. I'll be like, nah, 3D was so much better, but no replacement for any fundamentals.
I do that all the time. I'm like, I always like, because I do that a lot where I'm like, I see someone do something really cool, and I'm like, dude, I want to do that. You know, like my whole like learning journey was like that. And the reason I tell everybody this, reason I'm like, I'm so like for everybody, right? All these like little notes and things that I'm saying, I don't say little, I'm talking a lot of shit up here, but like all these things that I'm saying, it's not because I was like, I avoided the pitfall. You know what I mean? It's like I am better than thou, and you shall follow my teaching. No, man, it's because I fucking did it too, dude. I was like, I wasted so much time doing things that I probably didn't need to do, you know, because everyone else is doing it, right? It's easy to want to do that, and you know, it's not. It's when you're working, right? When you have like time, right? Like it's expendable time is really what we're talking about here. When you have expendable time, it's fine. You can do whatever you want, right? Expendable time meaning you have work, right? Because you can now kind of focus on being just learning kind of whatever you want to learn at whatever pace you want to learn at, right? So that's cool. But most people don't have that, not as students. And you only need a certain level of skill before you can actually work. There's only a handful of things you need to be good enough at. But until you get there, you won't actually get that I guess that skill. You know what I'm saying? You won't actually get until you actually like, you know, hit that level, you won't actually find work. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's if you learn the right things, you'll get there. It's not a like this person's talented beyond belief, and you know, you will never find someone of their caliber. It's not like that, right? There is a level of talent that I do believe in, but to get into this industry, I don't think that talent is relevant quite yet. I think it's more reserved for legendary level artists, where like the ones that are really pushing what entertainment design even is, right? But to work, you don't need to be there. You just need to be someone that can follow directions decently well, and someone in that likes learning. You know, you just have to have an interest in learning. And once you get that, oh, dude, life just unfolds for you, man. It's, you know, everything kind of just comes a little bit easier because you want to do it. You know, you actually like doing this thing, right? This thing that we call art. You actually enjoy, you know, figuring things out, you know. But if you're just, but it only takes a couple skills. You'll only have to be good at the things you need to be good at. You can be an environment designer have never touched figure drawing. I don't recommend it. Do some figure drawing because, you know, it's good for you. But generally speaking, you'll probably be okay if you can't even draw a hand. I'm not really that good at hands. I can kind of do it. If you give me some time, I can probably figure it out, right? But it's not something that they're like, you can't draw hands as an environment designer. Get out of my office. You know, it's not like that. It's just like, yeah, that's what the character designer's for. You know, that's why we hired that person for this, and then we hired you for the buildings, right? Because your buildings look sick. Hopefully they say that about you. Oh, check this out. Okay, so in case you're wondering about the flexibility of this process, because right now I'm not technically done with my design quite yet, right? Like I'm not like done with the base gray yet, like I was talking about. So I'm kind of like causing an issue for myself where I'm like painting the materials, and then I have like the the black, stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? Like there's different materials kind of being brought in here, right? And so the cool part about this is if I ever need to go back and fix something, I'll just turn off my layers, turn off my my things, or at least turn off whatever I need. I can go into here. Let's say I want to like, oh, I don't like the way this line is, because you need to do it within like all of the different layers, right? Let's say you just needed to fix this and make it wider or some shit, Let's do something like that. Actually, before it, this isn't what I want to do. I'm just showing you as an example. Against my will. Fuck it. Okay, hold up. Let me just do that. Cool. I'm gonna lasso this out and do like, oh, I don't really like where that is. I'm gonna kind of adjust this to make it, better or whatever, right? So much better, cleaner, nicer, right? Okay, so let's say there was a bunch of adjustments you need to make, and you're like, okay, cool. Well, I don't have it on my initial. Do you see how my red layer is still that layer, the original vehicle, right? I just, the line's not changed. And so what you can do is just duplicate the whole thing like you would and make that red again, right? Which is pretty easy to do. Just repeat the steps: colorize, saturate, darken, whatever it is you did to get to that red color, right? And then all you got to do is grab the mask. Oh, I need to do this for black as well. Boom. Let's, do the thing. Pop, something like that. Cool, right? All you got to do is grab the mask that you had and then bring it back in. So now if I just hold Alt, like, on the original black vehicle I had, take that mask, bring it into the new thing, and now you'll have that update, right? Within 2 seconds, you can have all the updates back again. So in this case, what I'm probably going to do after this session's over is go back and probably finish off this kind of base painting, because I need to take this further. I'm mostly just showing you like how I would go about this, right? But if there's any changes you make, you can make those adjustments pretty quickly. Sometimes, like for example, when we're in production, there's like the idea of, oh, hey, can you fix that panel? We don't really like the way it looks, or, oh, we need this thing to happen. We need a door to open, whatever, right? You can go back and do that. You can also just do it on top, but you kind of miss out on some of the the customizability of like those layers. Does that make sense? So that's the idea. Nothing crazy, but it's still a very flexible process while still giving you the high fidelity render, right? Because that's the key here. It's allowing yourself to paint something at a super high quality and still being flexible enough to like make adjustments and do these things. Because that's my biggest thing, right? Being flexible in your process. Because I will promise you, any production thing that you ever do, there's going to be notes. No one's ever happy, right? And if someone is happy, something's wrong, right? I think like it feels like, it's like, that when they're like, it's quiet, it's too quiet. You know what I mean? It's like something's wrong here, right? That's usually what it feels like whenever you don't get notes on something. It's like when I don't get notes on something, in my mind, the project's been canceled. And they're just like, well, we got to finish out this contract because we're paying this guy, but we need to regroup, because this happened, right? Where they're like, I'm doing freelance or whatever, and I'm not part of the meetings or whatever, but they're like, oh, hey, yeah, that looks great. It's like my first pass, and it's like, that's weird, and I'll just give it to them. And then I find out later, it's like, oh yeah, they were just restructuring. They had to actually step back and like figure out some story stuff or whatever, and they actually didn't want to give me any notes on the thing because that painting wasn't going to be used anymore, and so it's a lot of stuff like that. So you know how it is. Cool. But yeah, a lot of rinse and repeat, right? And you could take like pieces like this that I'm doing, like the greens and stuff, and then like delete that layer mask, Oops. And then, you know, shift it to whatever color you want. You get whatever material you need and start kind of breaking out the paneling, right? Do whatever you need. You can like sign stuff. I don't know. You can do like cool patterns or whatever. But it's a lot of that. It's just rinse and repeat. Figure out all those pieces. We'll get into detailing and stuff next week, right? But I want you to get all your vehicles, for those following along, right? Get your vehicles to a good material breakdown level. Usually starts with getting all of your base structure, right, kind of rendered out. I didn't really go that much further past what I had here, and then from here it's just assigning values, getting colors. You can do variations really quickly. This can be one, and I could just kind of rinse and repeat, do it again for all the different color patterns that I want, and then, you know, there we go. So cool. Let's see. I wanted to try something. I want to try something crazy. Delete layer mask. Turn that mask back on. There's a this lobster was kind of cut in half. Not cut in half. It was the color pattern was in half. So I'm like, oh, what if the vehicle was like that? That'd be kind of cool. If it's just asymmetrical, that'd be kind of sick. That's not too shabby, bro. I'm just saying, man. Maybe it's green? No, that's too much. We'll come back to that. I'll figure it out throughout the week and then we'll go from there. Oh, this works for decals as well. So I'm going to show you something real quick. I'm going to grab Fujifilm. Go. Boom. Let's say you had something, right? Like some sort of decal and you want, like, you know, to paint it, right? You need to kind of get that logo on this car, but you don't want to like paint it in because the metal is already like bending in certain ways, and you know, doing the business, right? So I'm gonna take this Fujifilm logo. I have a camera as a reference. I currently shoot Fujifilm instead of Nikon, so I'd rather put a Fujifilm logo on this, but that's, you know, whatever. Just imagine it's a Nikon logo. So I'm gonna get rid of the white, convert to smart, rasterize. I'm going to make this white instead. Okay, so check it. I have my grid, and I have this logo. What I want to do is put this logo, right, somewhere like, let's say here. I want to make it big. I want it to kind of like overlap a bunch of different areas. And so I can use this. I can just distort it into the perspective that I need, get it, you know, working the way I want, place it the way I need. Cool, boom. But as you can tell, it doesn't work, and I'm going to have to like paint that down. But if you do what we've been doing, I'll take this whole vehicle, duplicate it all the way up to where I have like the gray version, and then command select that, mask it out, right? So now I have it's not 100% there. You're going to have to do stuff to it, but it gets you pretty close. All the edges and stuff are already working. All you have to do is follow some of those edges. So in this case, this edge is going to go like that, it's going to go like this, and it's going to meet up like that. So I just want to like kind of fill some of those things in, or even like kind of hitting off some of these edges there where it's like it's going to tilt up, you know, because, you know, perspective. Boom, 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 easy peasy. So now you don't have to worry about the material. All you're actually worrying about is that graphic read. You know what I'm saying? Easy squeezy. And just do something like this. Pow. Oops. If you don't know, I'm flipping between black and white really quickly by pressing X. If you ever press X on your keyboard to get the color swatches to flip between foreground and background, and the foreground and background is set to black and white, so you're getting that. So you don't have to do all of it, right? Some of it's like you can get away with some of it. Like some of this here, it looks better if you kind of, you know, do it correctly. But like some of this, it's like whatever. Oops. And now they're like, dude, you like map that out and plan it, and you look them in the eyes and you say, hell yeah, I did, bro. That's why you pay me the big bucks. And then, you know, little things like that, it goes a long way. And now you have like the exact render kind of fidelity that you would have had anyway, you know what I mean? And then now you can, like, if I wanted a white logo instead of a gray one, right, just push it white, and there we go. So that's not like the best placement in the world. I'll fix that later, but that's where we're going with it. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. 103. Any last questions before we dip out? I'm gonna paint for a second here, but if there's any comments, concerns, anybody angry that I called out their Inktober plans? Cool. We need a
They'll be plotting.
They'll be exactly. They're like, I'm gonna get revenge on this guy. He talks too much shit. It's all right. You don't have to listen to what I'm saying. Cool. All right, man. So, with that in mind, right, we're getting somewhere, right? So hopefully, hopefully this kind of makes sense, right? Just kind of recapping what we had, right? Just kind of see where we came from. Whatever the hell this thing is, right? Like, and I want to point out, like, this is how I normally work, right? Like, at the beginning, I was asking everybody, like, oh, hey, what would you like to see me do? And they said, oh, we'd rather see you do it the way you normally do things. Especially, like, as a concept artist, our final output is always a 2D image, generally speaking. I don't want to say always. Most 90% of the time, it's a 2D output. And so you don't actually have to take things that far, right? Especially in 3D where like, oh, I don't know how to model a vehicle. Like, neither do I. I just put some stuff together, but I can design one, right? And so render it out, do the best you can, get as close as you need. For me, this is mostly like just trying to get the shapes like kind of in the right spot. Because from there, I made a lot of adjustments, right? I'll turn off my layers here, right? And I'll save that original one. That way we can see it. Sorry. Boom, something like this. Where's my windshield? There you are. Turn that off, right? It ended up roughly kind of where this is, right? And, just that paint over. It does so much. But being able to paint over it is really the skill that you're looking for. If you cannot paint at the level that you're modeling, you need to work on your painting skills. You don't need to be better than a render, but you need it to be seamless, right? Or at the very least, maybe not seamless, but at the very least, it's not holding it back. To be honest, in this case, I do feel like the model is holding back my painting because my painting has more material indication and stuff like that. But as a whole, just remember, right? We're just trying to get an idea down with the model. You need like perspective, you need layout, you need some things. And then now I took some time to really render things out, really kind of play with some of those panels, get the form looking right. And then using my past pieces, you can start, doing those things. Like to make this whole side panel, I used parts of these vehicles and then, started painting and clean it up. And then you can use things like your cut lines like this. I didn't get to this too much, but you can grab pieces like this, copy that, bring this into your truck, maybe it's not a truck, maybe you're not even a truck like me, but you can multiply that, and you have some instant cut lines, and you have a grid set up because we always have a grid, and then just distort it onto the thing, right? You have the grid, it's already there. And then just be like, oh, I like the way that cut line looks. And then boom. And they ask you, did you draw all those cut lines? That's crazy. And you're like, I am crazy, so pay me a lot. And then, there you go. Boom. And then you just clip it in, and no one's the wiser. No one's like, there's no, you can like get rid of the ones you, like, I like some of those cut lines down there. You got to clean it up. You got to fix it. But overall, you're kind of in a better zone than you were. And then we're just going to, roll with that and kind of make it better, right? I'll show you where I get with this next week in terms of all those things. We're going to get into like weathering and kind of like finishing this off to make it look like fully presentable. But you can tell how flexible this design process is through like the ideas and iterations that we can do, and how easy it is to just kind of like paint one material. Don't worry about too much. It's bite-sized chunks to kind of get us to where we need to go. And then we'll figure out all the other stuff later, right? So, cool. If there's any questions throughout the week for those following along, or for those participating on their own, or in the Livestream Plus, please drop it in the Discord. If it's a big question, I'll answer it throughout the week. If not, it's I'll answer it during the stream. So, But yeah, guys, thanks for hanging out, and we got one more week on this. So real quick, we have one more week on this demo on the vehicle, right, itself, because we're on the 4th week next week. But there's one more week in September. This is one of those weird like 5-week type of months. Or just the way our schedule lined up. It's like we have an extra demo in this month. So we either have an open week or a continuation week. And I'd love to hear what you guys want me to do, right? If there's like a demo you want me to do that maybe it might not take all week, but I can just kind of start it for you or whatever, right? That'd be really cool if you want to see that. Or if you're like, hey, how would you push this further from, what you had, and kind of, or I can just continue and, do, I guess, more video on the process rather than like, we teleport to next week and then it's like, hey, it's done. And you don't really see me do it, right? So just let me know. I'll ask the Livestream Plus people next week during the stream as well, just to kind of gauge that and see how that goes. But if anybody watching as well, if you have suggestions, just put it in the Discord, and we can, or in the YouTube, we can talk there as well. So, but yeah, thanks for hanging out, and yeah, we'll see you next week. It's coming out well. So, yeah, later, guys.